Hi everyone, welcome to my studio, and today I'm going to be walking you through a tint, tone, and shade warm-up. So usually I start up my videos like this. I'll be sitting here getting ready to go, give you an overview of what it is we'll be working on. As you can see, this is my painting cart behind me, and that is the range of supplies that I'll be going over today. I am going to talk about a range of painting materials, from acrylics to watercolor to oil, not necessarily because you need to use all of those, but I would like to touch upon anything that might be at your disposal. When I do this exercise today, I actually will be using acrylic paint, but you can use oil paint. And I'm going to be talking about gessoing paper so that you can work on oil studies on primed paper. May or may not be something that you have tried in the past, but it's a nice versatile way to have a surface that can take both oil-based, acrylic-based, and also watercolor as well. Although with watercolor paper, you kind of want to use it straight with just the water-based medium. Again, how this is going to work, I come in like now and say hi to you, give you an overview. Then I'm gonna go pick up the camera and I'll walk through all the supplies, what I'm gonna be using, kind of what the station looks like. Then I switch to an overhead camera view and demo that tutorial for you there. Sometimes I have little inlays if I need source imagery. That's not gonna be required today. On occasion, I'll set up the video and it will be behind me as you can see me painting, and then this source as well. If this is a longer tutorial, I will change it to a time lapse. So if I'm going from start to finish, then I will speed it up. But again, this is just the setup for a warm-up exercise that's probably not going to be necessary. Okay, so today, again, tint, tone, and shade for this one. There's gonna be a follow-up video where I talk about progression and also warm, cool bias and how paint from the tube, so paint from the color wheel is a little bit different. It's like that printed out color wheel is a little bit different than paint you buy in the tube because all pigments have color bias. Again, that's in the next video. I'm not gonna go into that too in detail now, but I'm gonna be talking about that and why we might get muddy colors when we intend to get clean and clear colors and how we can avoid that from happening or use it to our advantage, okay? Okay, so that is all for now. Next thing you're gonna see is me walking through supplies and then some overhead as I get this tutorial ready for you. So now it's time for a little tour of the painting cart. Apologies for dog barking in the background. We'll get a lot of dog activity. Okay, so here is a box of oil paints. I'm not gonna go through the specific palette now because you can pick any color you want for tint, tone, and shade. I also have some watercolor paints out. Again, this is something that you could use for this practice if you so choose. Up to you. Also, I have acrylics out. I choose Nova Color. They're in Culver City, a brand that I really, really love. I also use Golden. Those are kind of my preferreds. I grabbed some gesso because I'm going to be showing you what to do with that in a little bit. I have slow dry medium and matte medium. This is what I use with acrylic paints. This helps it act a little more like oil paint, and this helps with the pliability. Again, as the course goes forward, I will be talking a little bit more about the importance of mediums and how they work. Speaking of mediums, over here I have some linseed oil. Those who have taken from me before know I like really cheap linseed oil, and I mix it with nothing. I have some stand oil. Again, I'll get into that later in the course and why it's useful. Here I have Gamsol. As you can see, it's down to its lowest levels, and I just kind of dip my brushes in here to clean them off. I try not to use solvent that much with oil paint because it really does degrade the brushes. So I do kind of wait, and then I use soap or Murphy's oil soap. I kind of soak them in that every week, so that kind of breaks it up. Again, at the end of a painting session, I'll run them through Gamsol, put them in a little bin with Murphy's, and then go from there. For rags, I usually use Viva paper towel or just cut up t-shirts. I like those as well. You can see I have a box down at the bottom. that's kind of preferred. As you can see in my cart, my palette is glass. I put glass here, like a leftover window or something like that. But you're gonna see that I also use a disposable palette, and I'm gonna show you that in the overhead demo. I like to separate my tools out. So here are palette knives, and then these kind of funny kitchen tools that I use to add texture, things like that. I always like to have them around. This just came in the palette knife kit, might come in handy. I never say no to fun stuff that you can do with paint. I always separate out my style of brushes from each other. So these are all watercolor brushes. As you can see, they're small, they're synthetic, they're very light, they're kind of delicate. These are for gesso, anything kind of heavier. This is both acrylic and oil brushes, and sometimes I use brushes like these. Oh, this should probably go here. Sometimes I use things like these for, let's say, mediums and maybe some glue, because they're older, bad brushes. This one's kind of stiff too, and so I might use it kind of as a beater brush or blending. As I said, I like Catalyst polytip brushes. Those, again, who have taken my class before, they know how much of a fan I am of these. They're wonderful for oil paints. They break down very slowly. They're great for acrylics as well, and they also have beautiful edges to them. So they keep their quality for longer. I have a series of fan brushes. I don't really use this that much. Again, this is for larger paints, but I never say no to a style of brush or just having something around just in case. So I usually kind of keep stuff I don't use as much over there. I have a combination of, these are like brights or flats, rounds. There are filberts. Those are kind of the longer round ones. Things like that. These flats I use a lot. You'll see me kind of go to those a lot. Okay, again, let me see if there's anything else in the cart that you need to know. Oh, last thing. So here I have put on a drawing board watercolor paper, and I taped it down, okay? So what I'm gonna do is I take this gesso here, okay? This is my Liquitex Basic Acrylic Gesso. Pour a little bit of that out, and then put an even coat on this piece of paper right over here. That will make it perfectly sealable for oil paint. So let me turn around and talk about that for a second. Okay, so going back into why you might want to be gessoing a piece of paper like that, you may have not done it before. What it does is that regular paper or non-sealed surfaces are too porous for oil paint, and they'll end up breaking it down. So again, if you're using acrylic, you don't really have to gesso a surface. If you're using watercolor, you don't really have to. But you can paint with oil paint on paper. You may have not been told this before, may or may not, but all you have to do is seal that surface. So what I do is I tape it down like you saw, make sure it's taped nicely. Again, a nice coat of gesso, you only need about 1 or 2. Then I let it dry. It buckles a little bit, but then it will flatten out. And then it's perfectly sealed for anything you want to do, be it painting studies, practice studies, anything like that, or a final painting. I sometimes, again, if I'm going to do plein air or just quick studies, I sometimes gesso a good amount of paper, and then have it ready for anything that I might want to do. So again, it gives me that versatility to switch over to oil studies or do acrylic studies, whatever it is I decide to do there. So talking about surfaces again, as you can see, I did this in the studio tour, but I have panels sitting around. This would have to be sealed with gesso if I was going to use it. Again, for studies, quick things like that, you can use small little simple canvases if you want, or again, little panels that you've prepared. That's no big deal. I also sometimes use things like this. These are small little squares that I buy either on Amazon or Blick. So again, for studies, warm-ups, anything that you want to use, feel free to kind of pick your poison with that one. Again, I might be preparing some of these for quick studies and just have them lying around because they're not made perfectly. I can't really make a painting series out of these. They're not cut perfectly. Some of you I've had before. I talked about MDF. You can see this is MDF, that's MDF panels. Kind of sturdy. At a small level, you don't have to reinforce them. They won't warp. They're very sturdy. Again, they just have to be cut evenly. That's the only thing. Sometimes they can get a little wonky. Yeah, over here too, I have these small little, these are great for like plein air studies or warm-ups as well. This is just kind of like a gesso board, as you can see. You know, masonite hardboard will do that too. So just to kind of give you an idea of range. Again, this is a painting on paper. That's, I don't know if you saw that. Pulled that out. You're gonna see with the studies that I do, the color charts, those were all on paper. Again, please everybody have some sort of watercolor block. This is just your heavy duty. It's kind of smooth. So I guess that would be cold press. I believe cold press has a smoother, or yeah, cold press watercolor. It might be hot press or cold press. There's one of the two, but you want it to be a little smoother. And like I said, you can use these for any of the studio studies. This size is pretty good. You can also cut it down if you want something smaller. You can also get a bigger block if you think you're gonna be using it for more stuff, okay? So now I'm gonna switch over to how we're gonna set up this study that we're working on. You are gonna need a pencil, eraser, ruler. Again, I'll show you when I get over to the overhead situation. So as you can see, I'm moving over to the overhead painting station. This is kind of behind me here. And I'm gonna talk about what I have. Like I said, I'm gonna do the study in acrylic, but you can do this in oil as well. So I am gonna talk about a couple of things with palettes that are specific to acrylics and acrylic mediums, okay? So I'm gonna kind of mix it up, but I always mix it up in the tutorials. Sometimes oil, talk about acrylic, get a chance to go over watercolor. That way we have a lot of versatility when it comes. Again, for the sake of this tutorial warm-up, I have the watercolor paper, I have a pencil, an eraser. You can use those putty erasers. Like my trusty assistant Pickles is, you'll see him pop in. Bin of water, brushes. Like I said, my oil and acrylic brushes are pretty much the same. I always keep rulers around. This I've grabbed just some blue paint because this is a one color demo. And then I was gonna say, or I said before, I'm talking about the difference in a palette if you wanna use acrylics. You can use the Stay Wet Premier palette. You can also use the acrylic paper that comes with it. What happens is it stays wet throughout your session. You wet this sponge, which is underneath. You put this paper on top, which absorbs some of the moisture without it being too wet and keeps you from really having to use this spray bottle too often, okay? Today, actually though, I am going to move that to the side. Use just as the oil one. When you see the gloss, that's the oil palette, and I am just going to spritz because this isn't going to take very long for me to do this. So because of this, it's speedy. If I was going to be painting for longer with acrylics, I would do the Stay Wet instead. Okay, as you can see, I also have glass underneath. I prefer this for oils, but this is nice for smaller sessions and maybe even moving around my studio because this one has to kind of stay where it's at. So for this one, I also am using a drawing board. I did tape my paper down on the drawing board just so it won't, you know, it might buckle a little bit as I'm working. That will keep it a little flatter. Again, this is watercolor paper. I'm using acrylic. If you had a gesso surface on this, you can use oils on it. If you are wanting to do a watercolor study, feel free to do that as well. Okay, so as it says in the instructions in the module, you want to start with a 3" by 3" square in the middle of the page. Now, if you want to be really specific about it, you can measure the length of your page. You can make sure that the entire the square is centered, that sort of thing, or you can just eyeball it. For the sake of making this even and nice, I am actually going to find the center of my page. There's a couple ways that I can do that. I can draw a diagonal across. Hold on, I'm gonna grab my longer ruler for this. Just a second. Okay. I have that little ruler that I allow to get painted on. This is my longer ruler for drafting. I have both, obviously. Okay, so I'm gonna draw across this way and across the other way. Diagonals help you find the center of the page, and make a little dot here. Okay, so I said 3 inches by 3 inches. So the easiest way to do this actually is just kind of like go across my center demarcation. Okay, so the center would be 1.5 inches. And so basically I can just draw a mark here and a mark here, okay? Then a mark here and a mark here. Okay, hope that makes sense. And then my 3-inch square now sits in the middle. So I kind of lined it up that way. Okay. That's kind of an easy way to center your square. Again, you can eyeball it if you want. It's not a test. But if you really, you know, just kind of, I'm kind of a neat and tidy type. So I want to have it right in the middle so that makes it easier for me. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna pause this for a second and start again. And I'm gonna erase my guidelines so I can start with a clean surface. Okay, I've also added a little bit of light. There might be some shadow. I hope there's not too much, just to kind of give it just a little brightness as we're looking at this. All the colors will change a little bit in video, but I try to keep it as close as possible. Okay, so the only thing that you're really measuring out is the middle. Again, you can freeform the tint going this direction, the shade going this direction, and the tones going this way. Okay, so for starters, I'm gonna pull this to the middle. Remember, I just have your regular old palette because we're gonna be kind of working quickly. I brought one of my little spatulas here to pull out some blue paint, and that's all I need for square one. Okay, so that's there. I'm gonna move this to the side. I'm gonna grab myself a nice flat brush, as you can see there. And without, my Nova color is so nice. It really doesn't need any medium or water. Again, Nova brand paint. Don't want to sound like an ad, but I do love them. It's very fluid. It's nicely mixed. It takes a lot of the headache out. Okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and, what am I using? I am using a turquoise, I believe. A turquoise blue. Again, those of you who've taken a class from me before, you know how much I love turquoise. Now, you can feel free to tape off this square to kind of give yourself some parameters, or you can just try to, I'm freeforming it, seeing how the brush does, and trying to get as even as possible, just using that flat brush edge, which is honestly good brush control. It's good practice. Okay, you can see it's on the watercolor paper. It's drying pretty fast, but for the sake of this exercise, it's kind of a good thing for me. Okay, now this time I grabbed more turquoise. Okay, move this underneath here. I grabbed more turquoise, but I'm also going to use my other little scooper here, and I'm going to put some white down. Kind of act like it's frosting. You see, it's kind of funny how I do this. I use those kitchen utensils. But when I'm actually mixing, I do it more professionally. And I grab some white, and I'm gonna put some of that blue paint in. Now, it's better to put the pigment into the white rather than the other way around. You're gonna get a lighter color a lot faster. Again, I think for the sake of this, I'll kind of doing a couple steps, so darker, middle, and lighter. So I'm gonna add a little more pigment to this. Okay. Just a mild tint, and then I'm gonna make a really light tint. And again, I wanna mix this on the palette to make sure that I got it right. Okay. I usually take my paper towel, wipe this off. Again, go back here. Okay, I'm just picking up the tiniest bit of pigment that's already on this. As you can see, I'm kind of holding this up, so sorry about the jitter. But that's kind of all I need. It's almost like a tinted white. So remember, if you're making a tint, use white first. Okay. I'm gonna put that down, clean this off again, and then push it to the side. This time, I am going to clean my brush completely so I can start with a pure color. got a little bit on my paper. Okay, if you're using oils, you want to clean that brush or use a new brush. Anything water-based, you just basically put it in water. Okay, clean that off. There's a little drip that's happening there, no big deal. And now, again, you can kind of decide. You can bleed that out. You can make it uniform. I'm now just going to use the paint in a tiny bit of water to kind of make this section. You can feather it if you want. This side of it is a little more organic. So tint moving up. Again, if you reverse any of these or have them go a different direction, tint down, shade up, that sort of thing, no big deal. This is just to give some structure. Okay, and then one lighter shade here. Okay, kind of a bleed, real pretty. Okay, so that's your tint going up. The next one is going to be shade. I actually might even switch out my brush. I do like to do that. I don't like to cross mix when I'm using different colors. So the last container that I'm opening here is black. And I'm a little out of kitchen utensils, so I will switch over to just clean off one that I have. Okay. Sorry, my hands are just cleaning that one off. And scooping up that black, put that on the palette. And that one's pretty stiff, so I'm gonna have to give it, see how it's not running as much as my other two. I like to give it a little squirt with the water bottle, and that seems to help loosen up acrylic paint just fine, okay? Same thing now, when you're mixing for these specificities, you definitely want to use your palette knife. I'm gonna go ahead and again start, now this one I start with the pigment and add a baby bit of black in, okay? Other way around, because lightening up or dealing with black is much more difficult, okay? So that's kind of a good jump. That actually darkens it up pretty quickly, okay? And then I'm gonna do one more that's even darker, clean that off. Okay, so as with white, I did white first, but with black, I do the color first, or the hue, okay? So that's pretty good. I've got this one is kind of a mid step and much darker. Let's see how it looks on the page. Okay, again, add a little bit of water for this. Not adding any matte medium, I could. But we'll kind of get into matte medium at a later date. All matte medium is really going to do is, like water, increase flow. And matte medium is the best when you've kind of worked on the painting for a bit. In the early layers of acrylic, you can go ahead and just use water. But as you've built up the paint more, you want to switch to matte medium because the water will actually start to strip the paint, okay? So again, since I'm just making a chart, water is no big deal, and I can just kind of use it there, okay? So you can see now going the different direction. Again, trying to do brush control. It's a different brush. You can see when I use a smaller brush, it's a little bit wilder, you know? So a lot of times, a lot of you are asking, you know, you're not getting that edge or that mark the way I want it. I'm gonna add a little more black one to that one to make it different, okay? You know, why am I not getting the look that I want? Well, sometimes you're using the wrong brush size. So you always have to make sure that you're using a larger brush is actually usually better. Okay, so we've gone tint up and then shade down. Okay, you're gonna see these acrylics kind of dry dark as I go. Oil paint's gonna give you kind of a different feeling when you're doing this. And again, watercolor will have more transparency with the page. Okay, the last one is tone, and I kind of already have that going. So I have black mixed into the blue here, but all I've got to do, because what is gray? Gray is black and white, right? So I kind of already have this going on. So I can make a tone. All I've got to do is take a little bit of my blue and black mixture and add it to this one here, okay, the light one, and a little bit of it and add it to here, and I actually have a tone on both. Now I want to clean my palette knife so I don't go too crazy there. Okay, but my tone was already mixed for me, if you can see, because there's already that black on the palette, okay? Actually might go in a little bit more. Okay, so that's kind of whitish. And I'm gonna clean that off a little bit and do it here so I have a lighter tone. Do a light one on one side. Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and fill that in. And I can make bigger swatches with those. Okay. So I'm gonna add water to that. Tone will be here. Maybe make a big swatch of tone here. Okay, that's on one side, so that grayed down, and it should look different than the other ones. It should kind of give you a different look, feel. It should feel more neutral. If it's not neutral enough, add more gray. Okay. Almost added too much gray to that, so I'm kind of brush mixing right now. Yeah, that's real gray. You know, one of the things that's tricky here is you want kind of a gray look, but you don't want to get rid of the color. Okay, so here, almost grayer than the other one, but I don't want it to not read turquoise anymore. Okay, so that's kind of the trick. And see how far you can push it, because that does help your painting. If you can make something gray without completely losing the color, that's a really good skill to have. Okay. Okay. Again, you can tape these off if you're really clean and neat. If you're like me and you just kind of like to let it bleed out a little bit, just feel free to let it kind of create its own edges. Okay. At the end, you might just want to label. You want to say that this is the hue. This is adding so much, you know, mid tint, light tint, tones are here, mid shade, dark shade. Again, key that you want to look at your work. Does it still read the base hue? Is it just manipulated from there? Nothing should change too much where you can't see that base color anymore, but there should be a difference. This should just be lighter but clean. This should just be darker but clean, and then that should fill those gray effects over there. Okay. I'm gonna turn the camera around, and that's about all for today. Okay, so that is all for that warm-up exercise. You can see my hands are dirty. You can see that leftover kind of palette and mess behind me there. Enjoy, have fun with it. Stick within the structure, but allow yourself to kind of explore. The next thing is going to be looking both kind of at progressions and then warm and cool, like temperature on both sides. What is a warm yellow and a cool yellow? What do they do to maybe a warm blue or a cool blue? If you haven't heard those tones before, I'm gonna be taking you into that wonderful world of color bias, which will be great. And you know, it's gonna be kind of a quick exploration, getting us warmed up, starting off, mixing, getting our colors together, and getting ready to paint. We're getting ready for those quick studies and those color focuses that we're gonna be doing throughout the week. Okay, bye for now. Let me know if you have any questions.